Hey, it's Mo here, your host at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I'm joined by Chris Graham today. He's CEO of Crown Capital Investments, one of the most successful PE firms that I've run across and gotten to know. And I've known Chris for over a decade now. I've seen the transformation he's made in his career from being a high stakes family office lawyer to now being a CEO of a private equity fund and having remarkable success. And his story from growing up in a trailer park in Detroit to doing what he's doing now is really inspirational. In this first episode, we talk about the moment that he realizes growth is great. And I think what's really interesting about this one is getting into how he thinks about growth, how he personally thinks about growth, how he personally even getting down to details of like how he blocks off his calendar, plans his time, activates learning and progress at a daily and weekly level. We get into that near the end of this episode. And I just think these episodes with Chris are really inspirational, and we try to close each one with some practical tips. So can't wait to get into it. Now, no, if you would like our weekly newsletter, Chris is a subscriber. He responds back to a lot of the weekly newsletters that I write. I spend about 3 hours every week writing something that you can read in about three minutes. And a nugget, a takeaway, something that you can do to get better at business development, great at growth. All you have to do to sign up for those is go to growbigplaybook.com. That's growbigplaybook.com. So here is Chris Graham. Hey everybody, this is Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I've got a treat for you today. I've got Chris Graham. He's CEO of Crown Capital Investments, and he's been somebody that I've leaned on over, I guess more than a decade, Chris, of
about that.
Being a high-end expert. Yeah, it's crazy. And I've been so impressed by what you're doing at Crown Capital. I couldn't wait to have you on the show. So everybody, you know what our first question for the first episode is for each of our series of 5. Chris, when was the moment? I mean, you had such a storied career as a lawyer and now basically a high-end investor with private equity, all kinds of things. When did you realize that growth was a good thing, that you wanted to pair a high-end technical expertise that you've got with growth skills?
Well, as a lawyer, you're kind of responsible for the whole gamut of a business, right? I mean, you have to bring in clients, and then you have to engage with those clients and do the work. And really, the whole process is really about engaging with that person and connecting with them at a deeper level, which really is what business development and growth is all about. I think for me as a lawyer, I got kind of stuck because I couldn't grow as a business beyond that. Although these one-to-one relationships were very deep, and I was engaging in those was enjoyable, but I couldn't get much scale out of it for me. So I had to kind of pivot to a different path for growth, and that was the private equity.
Oh, interesting. Well, and I know we can't name names, but you were the personal counsel and family office advisor for some of the most highest net worth people on the planet. And so even at that level, you didn't have the scale you wanted. So then when was the moment that you decided, man, I feel like I can have a bigger impact. I've got to have more scale. How did that go about that? And what I'm particularly interested in, Chris, is everybody who's striving to be more has to cut sometimes what they're really good at to climb to something and take a risk to something better at. So I think this could be quite inspirational. What was the moment you realized? How did you make that transition? It's a big deal to go from well, anyway, I'll be quiet. Tell us the story. It's going to be great.
Well, it was actually pretty painful to go through. I mean, so I had this great practice and I represented really high net worth people, and it was very rewarding, and I had these great relationships, and I kind of maxed out. And I could have a one-to-one impact because all of my work was very custom and very specialized to the family itself, each of the families I worked with. But I couldn't really scale that, have a broader impact. I had to be directly involved in everything that I worked on. And so as I realized I was only going to be limited to this one-to-one impact, I had to figure out how I could pivot into a more impactful environment. I was just kind of done with that one-to-one. I wanted to have a more significant impact on companies and their communities, and and a further reach. So it was a little bit scary. I pivoted out of law into private equity because we could actually impact companies, and companies have hundreds of employees often, right? Our company right now, we have about 1,000 employees in all of our companies in the Crown Capital portfolio, with 10 companies. And that is a great reach and impact for people that I oftentimes don't see, right? So instead of having this one-to-one relationship and impact directly, now I have a much greater reach, although it's less immediately rewarding. You don't see it as directly, but that's what I was really
Mhm.
trying to get to. But I had to give up a lot. I mean, 20 plus years of working in the high net worth space to make that pivot. But it was just something I'd kind of reached a point in my career where I was willing to take a chance on this other effort.
Well, let's talk about that. Take a chance. So, one of the mantras we use a lot when people are making transitions on like this are you have to cut to climb. So, if we think of life as ladders, rungs on a ladder, if you want to climb up to something else, by necessity, you've got to step off of something that was solid, that had a foundation. So, you had to be. You're now looking back. You've had all this success. I've seen your returns at Crown Capital, like you've had amazing success and you just raised a new fund, like you're really killing it. But that's easy to say, oh, it was easy to make that
Yeah,
transition. There had to be a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do?
yeah.
Like, is this
This
gonna
might not
work?
work, right?
So yeah,
Yeah.
I know. And you already had all this success. Like you are known around the country as one of the best of what you did. So how did you take that risk? How did you muster up the courage? How did you make that transition?
So for 10 years, I really loved what I did in that high net worth planning space and being a tax attorney. It was challenging and rewarding, and it helped me kind of engage deeply in really big problems, very complex things. And I have a mind that gravitates towards complexity. And so
Yep.
that was rewarding. But then for 7 years, like you said, I was kind of a nationally recognized expert. And I was traveling around, meeting new families and expanding my reach. And that was fun. And then it wasn't much fun anymore. Then it kind of lost. It got very repetitive after that, right? Wasn't not a lot of new things that I was seeing or learning. And so I really, at one point, I had been down this journey with lots of entrepreneurs, and I got to see all of their brilliance, right? All the brilliance they had in these certain aspects of their business. But I also got to see these huge blind spots they had. And I could see this and really develop a playbook of what to do, but also probably more importantly, what not to do in a whole series of situations. And I wasn't really using that skill set in a way that was productive and with its greatest impact. And so in 2016, roughly, I was with a client, and I remember it kind of struck me that, well, if Chris, if you think you can do it better, you should just go do it. And I did. About 3 months later, we bought our first company, and we were off to the races from there. And fortunately, I had some families that were willing to back me in some of these deals. And then when I had more success and grew these companies, I mean, our first three companies, we tripled in 3 years, each of those companies roughly. And so when I had some success, then I had more families willing to back me, and we kept kind of moving in that direction. So, but it was a little scary. I mean, 3 months later, once I bought that company, I was like, well, now great, now you've done it. Now you've
Now
done
you're
it,
on the hook.
right? Now, yeah, now you got to deliver, right? So, but it worked out, unfortunately.
Well, there's a couple, I think, sort of timeless maxims in there. One is trust yourself. Another one is we've got a mantra we say a lot as well. In addition to you have to cut to climb, but think big, start small, scale up is one of the things we talk about a lot. And I get the sense that you did that in this transition where you didn't flip the light switch off. You didn't just turn off the law practice and turn on PE. Like there's a chasm there to jump.
Yeah.
As opposed, it sounds like, there'll be a question at the end of this, I promise. It sounded like you said, "Hey, there's potential here for me to get scale like I've never had before. Think big, but start small, scale up." You said, "Well, let's just start with one company and
Right.
see what happens, and then get success and traction. And now you're on whatever fund round you're on, and
Right.
you've scaled up 1,000x from that." But tell us about that think big, start small, scale up. What was your personal version of where this could go? What was your personal vision of start small? And as the scale up, you were at month 3, month 4, month 5 with just one company. What did you do to scale up? So tell us that narrative. Go a little deeper.
Yeah, actually, the way I built the company acquisitions entirely was kind of built on that idea. I mean, so to get people to invest equity in the company and take equity type risk was probably a jump they weren't willing to make with me. So what I did is said, look, you can take all the front end debt risk, and I'll put my own money in, and I'll take the equity risk. And if the company doesn't grow, I'll be fully at risk, and you'll have made all your money plus a return. And over about 6 years of doing that, we paid 15.63% yield on that return with annual cash flow of 7%. So it was a nice return to those investors. But I took all that risk. Well, what happened was we really grew those companies quickly. So then people didn't have to gamble on me taking over these companies. Now they knew I could do it. And so then they actually, by their request, they said, well, let's do this as an equity fund now. Of course, they want to be on my side of the table.
Yeah,
then, right?
We like you making all that money, but could we make the money, Chris? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's exactly what they said. They said, you've done great. Now let's do a fund. And so I said, sure, that's kind of what I'd rather do. I'd rather we all bear the risk together when we all succeed together.
Gives you more scale too.
Today, and that was one of the problems, is raising money on every single deal as we went was very difficult to scale. Certainly more scale than the law firm, but it was difficult to scale in an equity fund type of way. And so last year we launched the fund and we were able to raise $100 million in 6 days and bought 5 companies and rolled in 3 from November 15th to December 23rd, including a holiday in between. So it was a pretty hectic pace last year. And so today we've got 8 companies in the portfolio, and in another month we close on the 9th. And so that's kind of where we are today.
Chris, this is so inspiring. I think a lot of people have aspiration to do something bigger, and they could look at somebody like you and say, gosh, there's no way I could do what Chris did. But the way you just described that ramp, other people could have a ramp their own that where they, in the beginning they take a little more risk. They bet on themselves. And then people see their success and they want to join. So the think big, start small, scale up. So let's close this episode with this one. Let's say somebody's out there, they're watching, they're listening. They're like, I want to make a change. I want to cut something to climb somewhere else. What advice would you give our audience for somebody who wants to do that, but they're hesitating a little bit? They're like, gosh, it seems like a lot of risk. What would you tell them?
So one of the best things I did, that's an interesting question. So I actually, in 2016, knowing I wanted to make this pivot, I scaled back our law firm. We literally went from 22 attorneys to 6 attorneys in about 5 months because I wasn't having success scaling the firm. So I decided to go the other way. Let's scale back and be very boutique, and let's create a bandwidth on my calendar. Let's literally block days. So we started blocking about midway through 2016 my Thursdays. And it wasn't that I wasn't working. It's just that I wasn't committed to a schedule of call, meeting, right?
Yeah.
And that gave me time to think about what this private equity is going to look like, maybe reach out to people, maybe have some more casual lunches without time pressure to think through and really build a model. Now, that did start over time to pull the law firm down a little bit, right? Because I wasn't fully engaged in the law firm. I was working, 3-4 days a week on the law firm, but I still had it. And if I needed to, I could scale it back up, right?
Yep.
But it gave me a little bit of bandwidth. So what I would say is block time to dedicate to the new venture. It can just be a little bit of time. It could be a half a day at first. But here's what happens. If you don't block time, there's always something to absorb the time that you didn't block for the new venture. You'll never get off the old ladder if you don't block a little bit of time for the new ladder.
Mic drop. I love it. Chris, people are going to want to, a lot of times I'll summarize an episode. Don't need to do it. That was brilliant. Hey, people are going to want to reach out to you. They're going to find out more about what you do, connect on LinkedIn, email you directly. Where should they go?
So we're on LinkedIn at Crown Capital in Atlanta, and my own personal LinkedIn. But our email address is the best way to reach me at cgraham@ccfos.com.
I love it, and we'll put that in. We'll put the LinkedIn link in the email in the show notes. Everybody, if you're moving down the highway, you don't have to pull over. Just grab the show notes later. Chris, this has been awesome. Everybody, we've got 4 more of these coming up with Chris. He's going to drop some knowledge. You're going to learn a lot and be inspired. So make sure you follow, subscribe, turn on those notifications, all the stuff that I'm legally required to say at the end of a podcast episode, because we've got 4 more great ones coming up with Chris. Chris, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mo.
Hey everybody, Mo Bunnell here, your host at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. If you've ever wanted to take some kind of advancement in your career and you've always wondered how, don't watch this episode, watch the last one, because Chris Graham told us exactly how to do it. In this episode, we're going to have some awesome content too. Chris, you've had so much success, as it seems like everything you touch turns to gold. You get the Midas touch. you've always had a way about driving for growth in a real positive way that impacts others. Tell me what's your definition of growth? We could also say what's your definition of business development, but I feel like with what you're doing now, a broader definition is appropriate.
Yeah.
What's your definition of growth?
So I that's a, again, interesting question. I think for me, I've always been driven by learning, right? So digging in and learning new stuff. And then really, I mostly in my business development efforts, I mostly consider myself a teacher. There's a lot of great
Mm.
information right now. I think Daniel Pink wrote a book about To Sell is Human, right?
Yep.
I think it's a great book about finding common ground with your customer or your client. And so I always approached my customers, my investors now, the presidents I talk to, because literally what Daniel Pink says is we spend all our day selling, right? We're selling ideas about how you should manage that business, why you should invest in our fund, why you should use me as your attorney. So in that effort, I always tried to kind of reteach the things that I had learned. And I was constantly learning so I could connect these dots for people and just
Yeah.
show them what was available. Because what people really want is somebody that will help them identify problems they didn't even know they had and help them protect them against those problems, help them solve those problems. Because if you're an expert in one thing, it's hard to even know all the things out there you could get caught up in. You might have your specific things you're very aware of, but there's a lot of other things that surround that area that you might get caught up in. You didn't even know tools that were available to solve that problem.
Yeah.
So I was always very educational in the way I approach it. Still am.
Well, right, and we've hired you for different things over the years. Back in the day, when you ran the law firm, and you're incredibly good at connecting those dots. For example, I can remember you going to the whiteboard in a very intimate setting, and you're sort of painting the future for something we were thinking about, and you're able to help us sort of that old metaphor of see around corners that we didn't even know. And,
Right.
and you
That's
have
right.
an incredible way to synthesize and project in the future. So, and by the way, audience, Daniel Pink stuff's awesome, and he's been on the show. I think it was episode 789 or something. So we'll put that down in the show notes if you're interested in. Dan and I mashed up To Sell is Human and the Snowball System. Really cool work, and he did an amazing job. So it's a great interview. So Chris, I want to sort of double down on this idea. There's some people in our audience that can think, gosh, selling is bad. They got the bad S word in their mind. And the mantra we use a lot is everybody hates to be sold to, but they love to buy. We love to buy things. So if we can design a process that's magnetic, that people hear about us, they reach out to us, they want to ask us those questions, get our advice. They want our help solving those problems like you defined. What's your advice to somebody on how they can have the right mindset to not worry about the bad S word of selling, but rather think about it as growth or helping or designing a great buying process? Or what's your advice around making that mindset shift?
Yeah, that connection, right? So I used to think when I would go into a room of a new client, like I had seen maybe a file and I'd seen a balance sheet or some information about this family, and I would go in and I would think, I can't wait to see what I learn and to show them how I can help them. I would just kind of get in that mindset before I even entered the room, and it was sincere. And so I could make that connection with them because I really wanted to seek to learn about them and what they were concerned about and really be aware of their particular circumstances. Because I think to sell to somebody, that feeling that nobody likes is being sold to. I think that is when I don't really care about you. I just care about you buying the thing I have, right? But the other way to do it is to really care about them and then give them the thing that they need or that they want. And if you're listening to them, you can actually kind of customize or specialize the deliverable or the solution.
Yep.
It's hard to specialize, coffee mugs, right? But you can deliver something that's specially engaged in them if it's a deeper kind of solution.
Well, so let's, we used some law firm examples. That was your prior life in the last episode. Now let's talk about your current life. You're in the business of growth, not only growing the companies that are in the Crown Capital portfolio, but you're in the business of also raising more funds to buy more companies and have a bigger impact. So let's just decode your process now. So you meet with somebody that could be a potential investor. You're at lunch. They're real interested in what you do. How do you go about it?
I have a very similar approach. So I try to learn as much as I can about what their investment desires are. What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to have long-term growth? Are you really an early stage guy? You're really into technology? Because that's not me. That's not what I do, right? We buy legacy
Hmm.
companies that have long track records that are kind of flatlined, and we grow them from there. But they're stable. They're safe, right? I always say boring is beautiful. But boring produces a lot of cash flow, and boring can catch growth if you know how to move it in the right direction. So we've got a great track record, but that might not be what somebody's interested in. So, I try to figure out what their investment strategy looks like now and how this might fit into it. Sometimes it doesn't fit,
Yep.
but often it could provide a slice or a larger slice of whatever they're trying to accomplish.
So paint a tangible example. Obviously, you wouldn't name names or anything, but I would imagine that the kind of people you talk to have a really big portfolio, right? They've got the normal stuff, stocks, bonds, cash, T-bills, all that stuff, but they probably have alternatives, like what you do too, right? It could even mean art, or it could be PE investments. How do you, what kind of things are you listening for? How do you talk about the strategic fit that you might have with their overall goals? Just give us a little more detail.
So I look for risk profile because we are a lower risk profile. I look for their cash kind of requirements on an annual basis because we are a cash flowing vehicle. And so it's really the truth is that I didn't invent this. We pretty much have a Berkshire Hathaway model. It's just a scaled down version of it. I mean, I am a value investor. So we buy companies that have a lot of value. We can get them at lower prices because there's not a lot of competition for these smaller companies, and they produce a lot of cash. So we make distributions quarterly in our fund. And so somebody who wants to make an investment in private equity, but also needs liquidity on a regular basis, this is kind of that. And we also have a pretty well-defined mission. So somebody who wants to be, I'd hate to use the word activist investor or an engaged investor with a mission, with a purpose, and how they use their money, this is a really great fit for it. And it really is about rejuvenating communities, and these companies help provide a stable foundation for economic opportunity in these communities. And that's kind of how we build it. So I'm looking for those kind of buzzwords, if you will.
Yeah, I got it. And I can tell by your what you're talking about, and also knowing you, that if there's not a fit, you let somebody know.
Yeah.
If there is, you follow up. So let's say I want to get super specific, because what we've heard from our audience is really practical answers is what they love, especially around the end of the episode, is they have some context. So let's say you're at this you're at the lunch table. Say it's anybody from a pension fund to a high net worth investor or whatever, and you see there's a fit, but they're not totally ready to go yet for whatever reason. How do you follow up?
That's a great question, both in law and in the fund side. So I have a very specific methodology. I actually will show them smaller bite size information. For example, on the law side, there's lots of things I could do for them, but I would start with an example of a specific strategy that may apply for them. And the next time I meet them, I might talk to them about a different strategy that might apply, right? To try to kind of feather ideas in, not a big picture of how the fund works, but here's a specific company. Let me show you the specific
Hmm.
company and what we're buying right now. And that kind of opens the door because you got to break it down. I think you've got to break it down to bite-size chunks for them to digest.
No, I couldn't agree more. All the research backs it up. One of the things we teach in Grow Big, this is module 16 for everybody that may have binders, went through the training years ago, whatever. Go back and revisit it. Chris, I'll get your reaction to this. We'll finish up this episode. What almost all experts do after they have that lunch meeting is they send a big recap email this big with the 17 follow-ups that they've got, and ka-thunk, it lands on the other side. And they
Yeah,
judge their success by, I sent it the next morning, so I'm speedy.
yeah, yeah.
But the problem with the big email with the 17 follow-ups is we delay. Like, what do you do? What do we all do?
Too
Audience, what do you
much.
do when you get a big, huge, long email? You're like, I'll read that later.
Yeah,
And all of a sudden, 3 weeks go by, and now all of a sudden this person is associated with guilt because you
right,
haven't replied.
right.
But if you can, I loved, we use the word drip out content, used feather, but what's been your response about dripping out these little micro investments, or I'm still thinking about you, or
Yeah.
I saw this and thought of you? Like, what's been your response as you've dripped out content or feathered it out over time? and then that'll be a good close for this episode.
Yeah, it's much better. I mean, we get a lot of great responses, and then people want to talk about that specific opportunity. The fund's a little bit too big and amorphous, right? But they want to talk about that specific opportunity. Then, interestingly, we have different ways we can bring them in. Maybe they're not going to invest in the fund this time, but maybe they could provide some mezzanine financing in that specific company this time. And the next time, they might be an investor in the fund.
Brilliant. So you're finding a way to get a toe in. That trust is being built. The bonds are being formed, and think big, but start small, scale up, like we talked about last time. It works with the relationships too. So, Chris, this has been awesome. I love it, man. Where should people go if they want to learn more about you? Want to say thank you for the episode? Learn about Crown Capital? What do you think?
We're on LinkedIn. crown-inv.com is our website, and my email address is cgram@ccfos.com.
Awesome. And we'll put those in the show notes, everybody, so you get quick access. Everybody, make sure you subscribe, follow the show, turn on those notifications. We've got 3 more awesome episodes coming up with Chris. Chris, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mo.
Hey, everybody, Mo Bunnell here, your host at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. We're at the middle episode with Chris Graham. Chris is CEO of Crown Capital Investments, incredibly successful private equity fund, doing really killer things. Check out the last 2 episodes because there's tons of inspiration and practical tips in those. In this episode, Chris, this is always a fun one for me to ask. When you think about reading the Snowball System, I know you're an avid reader. You read like more than a book a week. You're crazy about it. I love getting your updates, by the way, and notes. What's your favorite science step or story when it comes to the Snowball System?
Actually, I would tell you one thing that you did just recently that I thought, well, that's probably the best footnote from Mo that I've received. And it's small, but the truth is it was so impactful. Your email was, if I get this right, what's the right amount of content in an email, right? Is it too big? Is it too small? Like, how do I figure that out? There is a lot of like analysis paralysis that goes on in some of these communications, or even how to produce a business plan, or how to produce, a deck for an investor. And you said, think about it from your 5 years from now self or 3 years from now self, and look back on it, and it would be right at that time. I think that's brilliant. I think so. What happens a lot of times when you're in a moment is you have a hard time seeing the bigger picture. And so I always think the way I view it is if I can step up and outside of myself and say, okay, what does this thing look like in 6 months? Am I giving it too much importance right now? Or am I giving it not enough importance? Like in 6 months, what does it look like? In 3 years, what does it look like? And give myself more perspective. I thought that was a really simple, brilliant item that you had, right? So maybe not really directly in the methodology, but I think it was one of the smartest things I've seen you send me.
Well, I love it. Well, I love getting your replies back. In everybody, audience, what Chris is talking about is I send out a little weekly newsletter once a week. You can sign up at growbigplaybook.com to get that. Chris, I probably spend 2 to 3 hours a week writing what I try to get to about 700 or 800 words. You can read that in 3 or 4 minutes. So it's amazing to think it takes 3 hours to write what somebody can consume in 3 minutes. That's really hard work. But I love getting your reply. Sometimes you're like, hey, and on that one, you said something like, this is one of the best you've ever written. And I appreciated that. Yeah. So the idea, everybody, is like, whenever you're worried about, should I do X, Y, or Z, the construct is do something your future self would be proud of, far in advance. So Chris, when you're thinking about that, let's get practical. You're thinking about a meeting you're preparing for with a potential investor. You could even be thinking internally, like, hey, I'm going to have a board meeting I got to fly to, and I've got to move this leadership team as much as I can to get to the next step. How do you think about planning your day? How do you think about your time allocation? How do you think about planning your week? Let us peek inside of the mind of Chris Graham and hear how do you think about weekly and daily chunks and how you allocate your time.
So I'm very calendar tied and very kind of religious about how you use my time. So I start at 5 a.m., kind of the 5 a.m. club kind of methodology, with exercise and reading and kind of that I guess reflective state, right? And so I do a few things in that. I do the 5-minute journal, Tim Ferriss kind of classic. and I do about an hour of exercise at that time period. And then I'll read usually for an hour at that time as well, because I do read a ton. And then I kind of gets me in the right mindset to really engage in the work for the day. And I'm usually booked out a couple weeks in advance. So I use my assistant really well to keep me booked up on time. But here's what happens with an assistant. Got to be careful about this, because what they will do is book you and book you and book you and book you until the calendar is full, right?
Yeah.
So what we do is we literally, and I learned this, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I book time to be just focus time. Is what kind of shows up on the calendar. And it's time where I have space to catch up on something, to think about something, because problems come up that you didn't anticipate. And I'll give you one that I'm working on now that's interesting. You said this about your writing. I have rewritten a presentation I'm going to make to all the Crown Capital employees that we're going to do by video, that I've given to a couple management teams. And it is really about creating a mission for the entire, what we call One Crown, the whole Crown portfolio. But to create a mission that's kind of a noble mission, a worthy mission that everybody can engage in. It's been a lot of crafting of a 1.5 page, memo. I've
Yeah.
rewritten it probably 17 times. I have to have space to do that, though. That's not something you can calculate. How many times will I have to rewrite that? If you didn't have space, you wouldn't be able to engage at that level of detail.
Yeah. Well, I love where you're going because one of your mindsets, Chris, that I think everybody can learn from is it appears to me you're always striving for scale. So by rewriting that 17 times, the audience can go, wow, that's a lot of time for, 1.5 pages. But that's not the way to think about it. The right way to think about it is, if I remember right, you've got 1,000 employees that are all part of this portfolio. So if you get that presentation right, you can't think of it like it took 17 rewrites. You can think of it like I've got 1,000 people that I've got their
Right.
hearts because they're really excited about where we're headed. Is
That's right.
so the question at the end of that is that how you think about it? Are you thinking for scale? Are you thinking about how to allocate your time in a way that you can have the biggest impact from a scale perspective? Or what's your sort of rubric for what you put in those slots of time that you've kept open?
Yeah, it's probably three things on the writing in particular. I would say I'm trying to have the biggest impact.
Hmm.
And so impact isn't always about time. It's also about word choice. It's also about connection, right? There's other things in what I'm trying to do with that particular memo, right? It's not what you put into every email, but so it's about how to create the biggest impact, which could be leveraging time, but could be also just leveraging relationships and connection. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I use my whole day that way. How can I get the most impact out of my day? How can I think ahead and move these leaders and these companies forward because every mission is really a vision of a future that's better than today, right? So how can I move these leaders forward to that vision in a way that's most impactful?
Good. So you mentioned biggest impact is one thing, and you said there's three. What's two and three?
Maximizing my use of my own time, right? It was kind of baked into that time, right? I want to use my own time effectively, but I also want to connect deeply
Yeah.
on the things that require that connection. Or maybe a better way to say it is connect appropriately. Some
Yeah.
things I need to connect deeply on, things I can connect lightly on, right? So connect appropriately.
I like that.
And then do it in a way that's consistent with the longer term vision.
I love that. Tell me this. When you, I'm actually really curious. I've never asked you this. When you think about your personal long-term vision, how do you define that? How do you put that in your mind? I have a feeling that you've got that either very clear in your mind or potentially even written down. What's the Chris Graham personal mission?
Yeah. So I'm very specific about it. And that's what this memo is about to these employees. I want to have a long-term impact on these communities that literally the last 40 years of bad economic policy, in my opinion, has destroyed communities. It's kind of stripped out hope and opportunity. And I want to rebuild that.
Oh, so when you're thinking about maximizing your impact, you can think back to yourself and feel like you're on this mission to
Right.
restore
Yeah.
that hope.
Yep.
What's your advice to somebody in the audience that thinks, you know what, gosh, I don't really have a clear vision for what I want to do or how the impact I want to have?
You find the intersection of something that you're really interested in with big impact. I mean, it doesn't have to be people in trailer parks, right? It doesn't have to be that. It can be technology and how technology solves problems in healthcare. I mean, the intersection of two things that you're really passionate about, because the problem with big goals and big missions is they take a long time to fulfill. So you better be really interested in really accomplishing that mission. Otherwise, you kind of lose kind of track of it. So
I was talking to my friend Tim Grawl. He's sort of a worldwide expert on book marketing and storytelling and a couple things. Great guy. And one time I was talking to him, and he's like, this was really funny how he said it, Chris. He goes, dude, when you talk about business development and working with experts, he's like, I want to start a yawn and go to sleep. But I hear about how passionate you are about it, and I actually get really excited about business development experts. And I thought, man, when he said that, I really am excited. Do I know why? I do not. I do not know why, but I
right,
get really
right, that's
fired
right.
up helping experts grow their business and their impact they have on the world. So you sort of, I'm not sure there's a logical way to figure out what that is. You just sort of know what you're interested in, and then you got to
Yeah,
dedicate your life to
yeah.
that, figure out a way to have that big impact.
And I think and passion sells, period. Like no matter who you're talking to, if they're not interested in the thing that you're interested in, if you're passionate about it, they'll have interest because you're so interested in it. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't sell something you're not passionate about, right? You can't develop a growth mindset around something you're not passionate about. So find that thing, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great advice. All right. Hey, Chris, people are going to want to, this has been quite inspirational. People are going to want to reach out to you, say thank you, maybe learn what you're doing at Crown Capital. Where should they go?
My email address is cgraham@ccfos.com, and our website is crown-inv.com.
Awesome. We'll put those in the show notes along with some LinkedIn links and things like that. Hey, Chris, this has been great. Audience, subscribe, follow, turn on those notifications, all that stuff. Because what's coming up next is I'm going to ask Chris, what's a business development or a growth story that he's particularly proud of? And I can't wait to hear what he says. Chris, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mel.
Hey, everybody, Mo Bunnell here, your host at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I know that we're going to have a good episode on this one. This fourth episode in the season, every fourth episode is I ask the guest, hey, tell me of a business development or potentially a growth story you're proud of. Chris, I just have this feeling this one's going to be meaty and inspirational. So I guess I'm setting the bar high, but I just know it's going to be
Great,
good.
great.
So maybe I should say, audience, this is going to be awful. Lower your expectations.
Yeah, give me a chance to overcome. Yeah.
There you go. This is going to be absolutely pathetic. With that in mind, Chris, tell me of a business development or growth story that you're particularly proud of.
So we've talked about it a little bit before, but well, one, I think there's probably three things I'm most proud of. One is that I did make this pivot. I made this pivot to private equity from law. It wasn't easy. I kind of planned it for a long time. It took me a long, long time to really make that transition in full, longer than people see. So what I tell people now is I'm the longest overnight success story in history, right? I mean, it took 25 years for me to move into private equity. And then all of a sudden people are like, well, how did you do that? Well, it's been happening for a while. So that pivot was hard, but I'm actually proud that we made that because it allowed me to grow in a different way and be more impactful.
Yeah.
And then there's some specific stories. Like we bought a company that was doing about 2.3 million of profit, and we bought it June of 2018. And that was the first company we bought entirely. And I had a methodology. I had a system that I thought would work for the kind of companies that I was targeting. And I started to run this system. And it was 3 90-day periods, and we went through this process.
Yeah.
And within 19 months, we took that company from 2.3 million of profit to 4.9 million of profit. And we grew the top line only 30%, but we grew the bottom line 80%. So it wasn't all just more sales, right? It was really about process improvement, deeper engagement with the employees. And this is a blue collar factory type work, which is what my parents did, what my neighborhood did, in Detroit. So it was really meaningful.
Yeah. Man, so let's go to this Detroit. Like I see you as like somebody who helps people make transformations. And you've made a transformation. I mean, you grew up in a trailer park in Detroit. I remember you telling me that you flew your family up there to see it, to be around it, if I remember right, so your kids could see it.
Right.
Tell me about that transformation as well, as somebody who I would guess grew up and had no idea it was even possible to do what you do now,
Oh,
is my guess. Yeah. So
yeah. I didn't
how
even know it
tell me about
existed.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you didn't even know this was a thing, what you do. So tell me about that transition too.
Yeah, it's probably a couple of things happened along the way. I grew up in a trailer park. We were poor. I didn't know we were poor. Everybody else was poor too, right? So I didn't really know. Um, and it wasn't like now. So one of the things I want to do is rehabilitate communities that have suffered over the last 40 years from what I consider to be bad economic policy. Because when I grew up in the trailer park, there was a sense of community and there was a sense of we were kind of in it together. The parents were kind of in it together, it felt like, and we felt safe, and there wasn't crime and there wasn't drugs. Just wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And so it's been a shame of what's happened in those communities. And I feel like, how do we get it back? And I think it's delivering a sense of hope and opportunity in those communities with these factories that we acquire and rehabilitate, right? So I'm very dedicated to that mission. Um, but going from that, I was really good at school and in particular math. And so I went to Michigan and went to Wake Forest and kind of focused on tax law. So school kind of got me through that first wave of transition, this kind of ability I had with numbers. And then what happened, and this is interesting, I didn't ever want to work with big companies. I was recruited to big law firms to work for Coca-Cola and different things like that. It didn't interest me at all. I mean, Coca-Cola has been here before I was born, and it'll be here after I'm dead, and there was no kind of connection to it. I wanted to work with people,
Mm.
but I had a skill set that was best suited for high net worth complexity. So I was introduced to this whole series of high net worth families, and I got to work with family offices, and we developed very close relationships. And as that happened, I was exposed to entrepreneurs and people who saw the world differently than I could ever have seen it from where I grew up. It only took me 22 years to figure it out. I figured out that maybe there's a way to do this a little differently. But the biggest I could ever dream when I was little was serving other people. And a lawyer was a big deal, right? But
Hmm.
then when I worked with families, I realized that you could actually be more impactful. I mean, what's more impactful, a lawyer or Wayne Huizinga, who was one of my clients before he passed when I was at Arthur Anderson? Um, the impact that he had on all those employees, like that's a different kind of impact. It might not be as personal, but it's big.
Hmm.
And so my clients actually taught me how to make a bigger impact.
Yeah. So dig in a little bit here, Chris. Be a bit vulnerable. You know, our audience is like, wow, this guy's this really successful private equity leader, investor, fundraiser, and you grew up in this trailer park in Detroit. When you think about the multiple sort of seasons of your journey to get from where you started, where you do not even have awareness of what you could do in life, you just knew you're good at math in the beginning, and hey, I'll try to go to college. That was probably a big step given where you
Yeah.
came from. And you think about where you're at now, that trajectory and that path had to be hard. Like it had to be revelation after revelation of what you can do, what's possible, things like that. Dig deep and tell me, as you've made that journey, what are you personally proud of that you did? I know you're a team player and you always give other people credit and all that stuff. I get it. But you owned this journey. What are you personally proud of what you've done over those decades?
Well, there's probably multiple, like you said, in the phases, there's kind of probably something to be proud of at each phase. But it's directly tied to one, I think, underpinning that I have. I don't know if I should take credit for it or not, but I am proud that I have it. And I am insatiably curious. I want to know things about things. I want to know things about things that don't even matter. I just want to know things. I think it is offensive to my being that there's knowledge in the world that I don't know about.
Mm.
And so I'm hyper curious to a very detailed level of how something works. And that has kind of propelled me through these various phases because you could meet an entrepreneur and really just do your job and step away. But that isn't how I'm built. I wanted to figure out exactly how they were engaged in the work, exactly what they did and how they became this successful and what their vision was for their company. And I was really, really curious about all of that. And it helped me really craft a new vision. But then taking that curiosity and that knowledge and incorporating it into a new way of thinking about the world. And I think it's important.
So if you think back to some of the major junctures or pivots or step ups that you did, were those based on you learned something was possible because of the curiosity, and then you'd say, well, gosh, I can try that. Was that sort of a loop that happened? Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, when we bought our first company, that was it. I had worked for, 17 or 18 years at that point with families that owned businesses. And I said, well, I think I can do this better than them. I mean, honestly, I could see where they had these huge failings and they weren't seeing the entire playing field. They had some brilliant aspects of what they would do, but they had a lot of really
Yeah.
shortcomings. And I
Yeah.
thought, well, I think I could do better. And so we bought our first company literally because I had talked to a client and he said something to me that I thought was one of the dumbest things I'd ever heard about his business, the business he had run for 20 years. He didn't understand his business. And I thought, well, if you think you can do better, Chris, go do it. 3 months later, we bought our first business.
I love it. Oh, I love it. Okay, so last question in this episode. I'm super curious what you're going to say. A lot of people talk about that we learn the most when we fail. If you've climbed so much so fast that obviously, like all of us, there had to be failures in there. There had to be things that didn't go as well as you wanted. What's one of your bigger failures? What did you learn from it? How did you attack it? How did you get back up and keep going?
Yeah.
Just get a little vulnerable and share us something like that.
Yeah, I had a pretty big failure. I mean, part of the transition out of law was because the law firm was failing. I mean, it was failing as a firm. I wasn't failing as an attorney. I had really great client relationships, but I had to try to scale that to 22 attorneys. We went from 8 attorneys to 22 attorneys in 24 months.
Mm.
And what I realized over that journey was that I'm really good at big picture strategy and I'm really good at finite detail. And in between, there's a lot of, employee management and middle management stuff that I really don't care about at all. And what
Yeah.
happened with the law firm is I got pulled into that space and I was in this no man's land. I wasn't working on strategy because there was too much down in the weeds stuff, but I wasn't down in the weeds. I was just above the weeds. And the law firm started to kind of spin out of control. And I learned a ton because I learned, one, that I can't do it all. And that if I tried, that I would just lose all these people, and that I really wasn't able to pursue the scalability that I wanted to in that path. It really is the thing that drove me towards having this more private equity vision of things. That happened in 2015. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about that, Chris, is like a lot of people can look at a setback like that and just keep trying to plow ahead and figure out what to do. But I think it's neat what you did, where you took a setback, learned from it, and realized, hey, this actually isn't a thing. I thought I wanted this thing. I don't want the thing. There's got to be something different.
Yeah.
And then that's about the time you
Yeah.
started to do something different. And gosh, the impact you're having now is 100x what it ever
Right.
could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the new thing? So at that time, we had 22 attorneys, and I would tell you, I thought, boy, I could actually struggle through this, to your point, and I
Hmm.
could try to wind down the firm gradually, and nobody would notice, right? We could go through this natural attrition, and we'll go from 22 attorneys down over 3 years to say 6 attorneys. Or I could rip the band-aid off and just implode the firm, just tear it apart and take 6 attorneys and move on. And then they'll talk about me once, just one time. There'll be a negative kind of, environment in the market about the law firm. And I did it. We basically, went through this transition from 22 attorneys to 6 attorneys in about 4 months. And it was
Yeah.
painful. But we got through it. And then from there, 2016, we took off and everything was
Yeah.
great. So,
Yeah, it ties back to that first episode and the second episode, everybody, that were really inspirational, where sometimes you got to cut to climb. Sometimes that's something you're good at, you have to cut to climb. Sometimes it's something you realized it's not what you want to do. But ripping that band-aid off it takes guts. So
yeah,
congrats.
thanks. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Perfect. Okay, good. So, Chris, people are going to want to reach out to you. They want to say thank you for this episode, maybe learn more about Crown Capital. Where should they go?
So our website is crown-inv.com. And my email address is the best way to reach me. It's cgraham@ccfos.com.
Awesome. Good. Thank you. And we'll put those in the show notes, everybody, so you can reach out to Chris. Chris, thanks for being on the show. One last episode. I can't wait to have it with you. That's coming up next. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Mo.
Hey everybody, Mo Bunnell here, your host at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. This is the last. I'm sort of sad. This is the last episode with Chris Graham. He's CEO and founder of Crown Capital Investments, ridiculously successful private equity fund. Gosh, you've done so many things in your career, Chris. This is going to be fun to hear your answer. If let me paint a picture because people might be dropping in just on this episode. You grew up in a trailer park in Detroit. And so with that in mind, everybody, Chris, here's the question. If you could record a video about growth skills, about being inspirational, about business development, relationship skills, whatever it is, if you could record a video and send it back to your younger self, it doesn't have to be while you're in the trailer park, but I wanted that context for everybody. What would that video be? What would you say to your younger self? Go.
I'd probably be simple. Think bigger, quicker.
Huh.
That'd probably be it. Think bigger, quicker.
Yeah. Elaborate.
I probably made the pivot. Oh, so there's a couple pivots. I went from working for Arthur Andersen, after law school and accounting in Michigan. I worked for Arthur Andersen. Then I worked for a boutique law firm. Then I worked for a national law firm. And all along the way, it wasn't really a great fit. I mean, I was certainly productive, and the partners loved me. It was a great fit, but I didn't feel great about where I was. I was more entrepreneurial than that, and so I then made a pivot to my own law firm, and I did that too late. Though I should have done it 2 or 3 years earlier. I didn't have any concept of what I could do, and so it was hard to make that leap. And then in 2016, I made this deeper leap into private equity that had been building for a while, and I did that too late. I not too late to have success, but I think back and think, God, if I would have done this earlier, I'd be on this more aligned path with my, kind of, heart song, and so I think bigger, quicker.
And as I've known you for part of that journey, the last 10 or 12 years or whatever it is, once you moved to private equity, I've seen a glow about you that didn't exist before. Like you were great at what you did before, but now you're just, this is what you're meant to be doing. So a lot of the audience can probably relate to this idea of it should have thought bigger, quicker. What held you back?
I think not knowing. So I'll tell you what's interesting. When I first thought, God, I really want to be in this private equity space. I think I can help these businesses. I know entrepreneurs. I know how they think, but I don't really know private equity. I mean, what does a private equity firm do? They own these businesses, but what do they actually do, like day to day? So I actually went out, and this is maybe a lesson, something that you could actually do. If you think you're interested in something, what I did is I went out and I sold these private equity firms on what I had of value today. So I always kind of assess what I have available, right? So I said, look, I have these great relationships with family offices. I see a ton of deals. Let me work with you on a few deals. And so I got to look behind the curtain, and all that mystery that I had put in my mind that I didn't come from the finance side. I'm not a private equity guy. What do I know about private equity? It all went away. Once I got to look behind the curtain, I thought these guys have no idea what they're doing. They literally don't know businesses. They know a spreadsheet, that I can write a spreadsheet, and that's about it. And it really gave me the confidence that I could do it myself. But I didn't know that until I knew it,
Yeah. So if we get super practical here, if somebody wants to think bigger, quicker, if they've got an idea in their mind, but they've been holding back, it seems like your practical advice is find a way to use some value you've got and get involved. I like your idea, peek behind the curtains. Yeah.
See it. Like take what you have and say, okay, I have a few tools here that I can deliver value to them. And maybe without asking them for compensation maybe I'll get a look at what they do. And maybe I'll have a better way to do it. Maybe I won't do it their way, but maybe I'll learn how to do it their way too.
Yeah. I think this is interesting, Chris, because if I think back to folks who had wanted to do what I do. Yeah, I'm just thinking I'm the recipient of this for a second. What most people do is they come and they use this exact phrase, which I do not like this phrase. I don't know why it grosses me out. Hey, Mo, can I pick your brain?
Yeah.
And not only am I a little grossed out, I don't want somebody picking my brain.
I'm using it. I'm still using it. Right?
Yeah. I really need my brain. I need every neuron. I don't pick any of those off. I'm nervous. I'm barely making it. No, but that's usually the offer. Like, hey, can I pick your brain? Well, we're all busy. So then the real value that people seem to offer all the time is, we'll go to lunch and I'll buy. Well, I'm like, I'm not worried about paying for
Yeah.
lunch. I'm okay with
Yeah.
lunch.
I got plenty of meals.
So the value prop here isn't really, I want to help people, don't get me wrong, but the value prop isn't there. And I think your approach is so darn much better if we could approach somebody and say, hey, I'd like to get involved. Maybe I can be helpful with you in this way. And you just start offering value.
Right.
That's so much of a better way to get somebody's attention.
Right. Yes, that's what I did. I literally did that with a couple of fund sponsors and a couple of funds on about 4 deals over the course of a couple of years. But there's another really super practical thing. So there's a big fund manager, big, like a $75 billion fund, who I happen to know fairly well, but in a more personal setting, right? And when I was getting ready to move from our direct investment platform to a fund platform, I reached out to him and said, hey, I've been thinking about doing a fund, but I've never been in that space before, and I could really use a mentor. Now, what I also said was, do you know any? Ha ha ha, right? Because he's the biggest fund manager as you can imagine. But me saying that, he said, sure, fly down. We'll have breakfast next week, like right away. People love to mentor somebody. I mean, that makes you feel
Yeah.
good, right? So asking somebody to
Yeah.
mentor you. Now, here's the interesting thing about when somebody becomes your mentor. They almost, most times feel responsible for your success at that point.
Yeah. They're enrolled.
Because now your success is reflective of their mentorship, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different relationship. It's not just let me pick your brain. I could really use a mentor as I go through this transition. Are you available?
I love that phrase. Yeah. I love that phrase. So it's a direct ask. Again, going to super practicality, did you call the person? Did you email them? Like, how did you actually make the request?
Yeah, I emailed them that request because we had. So I tend to migrate towards the communication style of the person I'm engaging with, right? So I tend to try to be a super communicator, communicate in the way they want to receive information. And so he's very much an email person. He's not a text person, and he's not really a call person. But once he's my mentor, then I could call him anytime. I talked to him a week ago. So, but asking him if he could mentor me was incredibly well received. And I've used that technique a few times in my life, and it's always well received.
I love it. I'll give everybody a sort of a corollary to this. It's a slightly lighter version of the question that can work real well too. And Chris, I want your feedback on this. It's to describe a dilemma. Hey, in your case, it was, I'm getting into this space. It could be anything. It could be you're trying to grow a book of business at a particular client, a big Fortune 50 company. You could ask somebody for help in that way. So this could be mentorship. It could be a very specific thing like trying to invest in or growing a book of business at an organization. But the specific question that works really well is describe the dilemma and then say, what would you do if you were me?
Right. You know that
And I think that's a,
you
yeah,
know
go
what that
ahead.
question is though? That is asking someone to be your mentor, right? I mean, what would you do if
Yeah,
you were me?
it's just, yeah,
It's a
yeah,
practical mentorship question. When I ask somebody for specific help on something, if you still phrase it like you just did, or as if they could mentor you, I think to the person hearing it, being somebody's mentor, um, is is self-fulfilling, right? I mean, it's very rewarding to the mentor himself.
yes,
And so when you ask for help, I would just caution. If you say, "Hey, I could really use some help," to your point, everybody's busy. Why do I want to help this person? It's an allocation of my time that really doesn't do anything for me. Why would I help you? I'm busy. But
yeah,
if I mentor
yeah,
me, oh, well, that's interesting. He needs me, right? Now I'm special and I'm important.
yeah. Yeah, I totally love it. I think it's fantastic, and I loved your idea of it's enrolling the person now. Once you had that breakfast, I would guess your entire relationship changed with that
Yeah.
person going
Yeah,
forward.
and
Yeah,
now I check in with him and say, well, here's where we are now, and he's encouraged and he's supportive and he's engaged in a different way. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I'll close out with this, and I think sometimes people hesitate to ask these questions. We both gave a very similar version, two different wordings, but sometimes the audience might say, well, gosh, I just don't feel comfortable with that. It seems like a big ask. But I would challenge you, audience members, flip it. So if somebody just started out in your company, they're in your church, they're your next door neighbor, or whatever. Let's say they're a young person right out of school, and they ask you the question, "Will you be my mentor?" Or what would you do if you were me, or whatever? I'll bet you'd rearrange your schedule to help some person because it feels so good to help. And when we flip it, a lot of times we'll actually harm ourselves and postpone something we need to do to help somebody else. But for some reason, we hesitate to ask for help in these ways that you shared.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And again, I think you're getting help, but you're really establishing a relationship, right?
Bingo.
Right.
The
Mentor me, right?
mentorship version. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love it. Hey, Chris, this has been great. Think bigger, quicker. I'm going to remember that. I think a lot of people have that kind of feeling. I think that was a great headline and a great way to finish this episode. People are going to want to reach out to you. They're going to say thanks for this. Learn more about what you're doing to raise to grow the portfolio of companies you're doing at Crown Capital. Where should they go?
So our website is crown-inv.com. My email address is the best way to reach me. It's cgraham@ccfos.com.
I love it. Chris, I can't thank you enough. Your story is inspirational. All that you've done in your life, the impact you're having to turn things around for your organizations, for their employees, for their families, thousands of people when you start to include the thousand or so employees in the fund and then all their families and people that are impacted by your work. You're doing great stuff. Thanks for being
Thanks,
on
Mo.
the show.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Mo.